to read and score freshman applications to Cal. So what I will share with you today is what I've learned as a reader of freshman applications to a highly selective U.S. college. But first, let me thank Mr. Min and the Canadian branches of the League Prep for inviting me here today. I really enjoy coming to Canada because it means I can get away from Donald Trump for just a couple of days. So I apologize for our presidential embarrassment. But that's a testimony to how excellent the American higher education system is, because despite Donald Trump, people are still trying to come to the U.S. to study. So what I'll share with you today is some practical advice on how to best position yourself in the freshman applications for highly selective colleges. So we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to talk very quickly. I'll be around after the presentation as well if you have any questions. But let's begin with important advice, and then we'll look at some admissions data for the highly selective colleges and universities in the United States. We'll talk about holistic review. We will talk about how readers of applications will evaluate the information on your application. We'll talk about how to make a college list. And I'll also speak about what is a liberal arts college. And then finally, I'll present a very brief college calendar for suggestions for what to do in 9th, 10th, and 11th grades. Okay? So let's begin. Some important advice, and that is everyone relax. It will all work out. Everyone here will go to a good college, I'm sure of that. So it's a little anxious because you don't know where you're going to go yet, but you'll all be fine. Okay, it'll be fine. Also, there is no checklist of items that will magically throw open the doors to selective colleges, right? It's not like everyone needs to meet a certain platonic ideal of what a college applicant is supposed to look like. There are many paths to selective colleges, so you do you, just be a great job being yourself, right? Work hard, follow your dreams, show some passion, show some interest and intellectual curiosity, but you do it your way. Do a great job being you. So, let's look at some admissions data for the Ivy League schools, MIT, Stanford, and the UC schools, University of California, right? The system in which you find UC Berkeley and UCLA. So here are the fall 2018 acceptance rates for the 8 Ivy League schools plus MIT plus Stanford. As you can see, Stanford is now the most selective university in the country, less than 5% accepted, 4.7% acceptance rate. The MIT is 6.7, and then the rest are the Ivy League schools, so the 8 Ivy League campuses. You can also see the average SAT scores for the accepted students to these schools. Now, I should point out, average means average. These are not minimum scores to qualify. These are not minimum scores to get in. By definition, students with scores above and below these scores are getting in. Like average means average. So it's good to be at or above the average when you apply to these schools, but because of holistic review, which I'll talk about later, it's possible to get in with test scores below these average scores if the rest of your application is very strong. Okay, we'll talk about that in the next section. These are the acceptance rates for the University of California schools. UCLA is now the most selective campus in the UC system with 14% accepted. Berkeley accepts 15.1, and Irvine, near Disneyland, is the third most selective UC school, 28.8% acceptance rate. look at the number of applicants to UCLA. 113,761 people applied to UCLA for fall 2018. That's crazy, right? That is an entire city of people applying to one campus. So because of that, because of the number of people applying, this means that when you apply, there will be many, many students with exactly your GPA and exactly your SAT score, and a very similar looking list of activities. Okay? So this means that you need to write your applications in such a way that you don't look like everyone else, that you don't look like the other 113,760 people applying to UCLA, that you differentiate your application in some way, right? So that's very important advice for seniors. These are the average fully weighted GPAs for the accepted students to the University of California schools. Fully weighted means that all of your advanced placement or higher level IB classes are given the extra grade point in the weighted GPA. So unweighted GPA, in the US, unweighted GPA is 4.0 is the highest unweighted GPA, right? 4 points for an A, 3 points for a B. If all your classes you got A's, then you have a 4.0 unweighted GPA. In the weighted GPA, you get an extra point, you get 5 points for an A and 4 points for a B, because they're harder classes. Their AP classes are technically college level courses, so they give you an extra grade point to acknowledge the difficulty of the class. And when you factor in the extra grade points, that's called the weighted GPA. So these are the weighted GPAs. That's why they can be above 5.0, because students are getting extra points for AP and honors classes. Where I could find it, I gave you the average unweighted GPA, right? It's just a straight 4.32 grading system. These are very high GPAs, right? These are very high GPAs, but if your school does not have enough AP classes to allow you to get to 4.45, that's okay, don't worry. The colleges and universities will compare you to your graduating senior class first and foremost. Right? So the first pool of applicants you're compared to are your graduating senior class. So whatever your GPA is will be assessed first in the context of your graduating senior class and how you do compared to your classmates. So in other words, if it's impossible for you to get a 4.45 at your high school because they don't have that many AP classes, that's okay. Don't worry about it. You won't be compared to students from schools where that's possible. You'll be compared to your school primarily. And then, of course, we have the average reading and writing scores and the average math scores on the SAT. And you'll notice they're lower than the average scores for the Ivy League schools, MIT, Stanford. But still, nonetheless, UCLA 1450 was the average, the median score on the SAT. Okay, now that you've got an idea of the academic profiles of the accepted students to these schools, let's talk about holistic review. So, what is holistic review? It is the prevalent method for evaluating applications to top public and private colleges today. So, in holistic review, all the factors on a student's application are considered together as a whole. No single factor, for example, your GPA, is used to determine admission. Okay? And sometimes, because of holistic review, high achievement in one area of the application can compensate for weaknesses in other areas. Okay, so that's how I said, if you get in with an SAT score below the average, it's probably because the other areas of your application were very strong. So there's a myth in college admissions that A very high GPA and SAT score above 1,500 is all that I need to gain admission to the most selective colleges and universities, right? All I have to do is get straight A's, get a super high SAT score, and I can get into Duke or NYU or UC Berkeley or USC or Johns Hopkins. Now the reality is that excellent grades and high test scores are necessary but not sufficient to gain admission to top UC and private schools. So let's take a hypothetical example. Okay, I made these people up just for the purposes of an illustration. So let's consider Sally and Brenda. Okay, they're both applying to Stanford. Sally has a perfect GPA, unweighted 4.0 GPA. She has a full SAT score, 1,600 on the SATs. Brenda has 3.8 GPA and 1,400 SAT scores, but Sally was rejected and Brenda was accepted. How is that possible? Well, it turns out that Brenda also runs a nonprofit organization, right, as a high school student, and that achievement outside the classroom was what compelled them to accept her. Whereas Sally, all she had were good grades and good test scores and no achievements outside the classroom. Right? So under holistic review, what you do outside the classroom can matter as much or sometimes more than what you do inside the classroom, because again, when there's 113,000 people applying to your school, there's going to be a lot of people who have 4.0 or 1,600 or super high test scores or super high GPAs. So when everyone has strong test scores and strong grades, then what you do outside the classroom is what differentiates you from the rest of the applicants. Okay? So let's take a look then at how will application readers evaluate the information on my college application. Your college application has at least 3.5 years of your life on the application, right? From 9th grade through fall semester of 12th grade. Okay? At least 3.5 years of your life are on that application. And what we do is we will sort it into 3 different areas: academic profile, extracurricular profile, and personal and family information. Now, this is a general scheme. This is sort of a model that is used, but the details can be different from school to school. So for example, at Berkeley, we would look at all 3 areas and then assign the application 1 score after considering all the areas. And the scores range from strongly recommended MIT, recommended MIT, maybe, recommend deny, and yes, strongly recommend deny. Right? Like, this person is so terrible, do not let them or her here on campus. So that's Berkeley, 1 score after looking at all 3 areas. Other schools will give a separate score for each area. Some schools combine extracurricular and personal and family information into 1 category and give that 1 score separate from the academic profile. Okay, so different schools will do it different ways, but this scheme, this model is true for pretty much any holistic review. Your academic profile, your extracurricular profile, and your personal and family information. Okay. By the way, 3.5 years of your life on that application. There's a lot of information. So not just your name and your address and what school you go to, but also things like how big is your school, the teacher-to-student ratio, average SAT scores from your school, how many 8th year honors classes are offered at your school. There's information, there's your transcript, right, what classes you took, the grades you got in it, your standardized test scores, your SAT or ACT, your subject tests, your AP exams or IB exam scores, right? There's also your extracurricular activities list and descriptions of each of those activities. There's also your personal statements the college application essays, right? So a lot of information. How long do you think it took me to score all that information? Like, how long do you think I spent on one application?
1 minute.
What do you think? 10 minutes? No, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Just, you know why? Because I had to read 600 applications in 2.5 months, right? And score 600 applications in 2.5 months. I was scoring applications right after we opened presents at Christmas. These were terrible Christmas vacations because I was scoring applications from December through February. But because I had so many to do, I would have to go very, very quickly through each application. So yes, there's a lot of information on each application, but I'll go from cover to cover, including reading the essays in 5 minutes, because I have to get through a ton of applications. So for seniors, when you're a senior, keep this in mind. The readers of these applications don't spend a whole lot of time reading the information. So make sure your application, the information is presented very clearly in a very organized way. If there's any questions that come up because there's something confusing on the application, I will not be emailing you or calling you to ask for clarification. I'll just say, oh, well, I don't understand what this means to that, right? And then therefore that application doesn't help you. Okay, so some schools that, Berkeley would receive, I think, 82,000 applications in fall 2018. Some schools, like Bard College in New York, only received 5,000 applications. So depending on how many applications the school receives, the readers of those applications might spend more time if they don't have as many to read. But at a UC school, at a large school, USC is another large school, lots of applications, then readers will go very quickly through applications. So just to let you know, students, that these application readers aren't sitting down like a glass of Pinot Noir and then lovingly reading every word that you're writing. No, it's oh, what a lovely turn of phrase. No, it's not like that. Right? It's yes, maybe, no. That's the way it goes. It's very, very fast. Okay, so make sure your applications are super well organized, and that's why it's probably a good idea to work with an elite counselor to help you organize your applications so that they're very clear, no questions, no confusion on it, okay? All right, so of these 3 areas, academic profile, extracurricular profile, personal and family information, of these 3, the most important is the academic profile, and that's because unless your extracurricular activities rise to the national or international level, then your academics will be always more important than your extracurriculars. What you do inside the classroom will matter more than what you do outside the classroom, unless you are literally one of the best tennis players in Canada, right? It has to be national or international level that you reach for your extracurriculars to matter more than your academics to a college. So let's take a look at that academic profile first. It is the most important of the 3. And that consists of GPA, strength of class schedule, test scores, and other factors. Of these 4 components of the academic profile, by far the most important is GPA, your grades, and then also the strength of your class schedule. Did you take a lot of advanced classes? Did you take a lot of honors and AP classes? Or were they all regular level classes? Obviously, the people that challenge themselves with advanced coursework, honors and AP classes, will come out better in the application review than students who didn't take challenging courses that are offered at your school. Now again, if your school doesn't offer a lot of AP and honors classes, don't worry about it, that's fine. Again, you'll be judged in the context of your school. But if your school does offer advanced coursework, then hopefully you are taking advantage of that and taking a lot of advanced coursework. So notice that I said the grades are more important than even test scores. And this, I think, is important. This is important to point out to a lot of immigrant parents who come from schools in, for example, Europe or Asia. The SAT is not the Gaokao, right? It is not the one thing that gets you into a selected college. It is one factor of many factors that application readers look at. So the grades are considered more valuable than the SAT score. Okay? And that's because colleges know that you can get an SAT score in 4 hours, but it takes years to make your GPA. So they will view your GPA as a more reliable predictor of your potential as a college student. Okay? So grades more important than test scores. Let's talk about GPA. We look at both the weighted and unweighted GPAs on an application. If you're applying to UC or Stanford, for some reason, UC and Stanford only look at 10th and 11th grades to calculate your GPA on their applications. In other words, the colleges will see your 9th grade grades, but they will not use it to crunch the number that becomes your college application GPA for UC and Stanford. Private schools like Johns Hopkins, NYU, they do factor in 9th grade into your GPA. But for some reason, Stanford and UC only look at 10th grade and 11th grade. Moreover, UC does not use plus or minus, right? So you have the A minus, B plus, right? Versus a B plus, B minus. There's no pluses and minuses on the UC GPA calculation. So for you juniors and younger, this is very, very important to take note of this, because even though an 89 and a 90, right, 89% and 90%, that's only 1 percentage point, right? It doesn't seem like a lot, but on the UC GPA, an 89 rounds down from a B plus to a B, and a 90 rounds up from an A minus to an A. Okay, so 1 percentage point difference actually makes a big difference on the GPA calculation. So students, if you're at an 89, right, do whatever it takes to move that grade to a 90, because your A minus will round up to an A, and the B plus will round down to a B. Okay, so do whatever you have to do. Do all the extra credit assignments in your class. Wash the teacher's car. Compliment the teacher's tie. Whatever it takes. Move that 89 to 90. Okay? Also, only academic classes are factored in to the GPA. So physical education classes are not considered academic classes. Typically, classes that extracurricular activities like journalism, that sometimes in some schools will get a grade, those are typically not considered academic classes. Okay, so it's just core academic subjects: English, math, social science, laboratory science, language other than English, and then some electives. Okay, so remember, this is by far the most important part of your academic profile. Next most important will be test scores. So as of now, if you're applying to a University of California school, like UC Berkeley or UCLA, or UC San Diego or UC Irvine, they require the SAT with the essay. Okay, there's 2 versions of SAT, just like there's 2 versions of ACT. SAT without the essay is 3 hours. SAT with the essay is 3 hours and 50 minutes. Okay, so if you're applying to UC, you need to take the SAT with the essay or the ACT with the writing section, which is what ACT calls its essay. Now, here's the thing. I attended a conference in Salt Lake City last September, and all of the colleges in America were there, represented at the National Association for College Admissions Counseling Conference, NACAC conference. And I asked each of the UC schools, the UC admissions officers who were there, so UC requires the essay. How does the SAT essay factor in to your admissions decisions? And to my surprise, each of them said it doesn't factor in at all. So I asked, so let me get this straight. UC requires the SAT with the essay, but you don't look at the SAT essay score to decide whether you want to admit the student. And they said, that's correct. And I said, why are you doing this to these students? And they said, it's because they're conducting a research study in which they will try to determine whether your SAT essay score has a high correlation to your freshman year GPA if you're accepted to the UC schools. So they're doing data collection by making you take the SAT with the essay or the ACT with the writing. Now, keep this in mind. It is not used at all towards the admissions decision. So just get a decent score on the SAT essay. Don't worry about the essay, worry about the multiple choice sections instead. The multiple choice sections, yes, they do matter very much for admissions purposes, but the essay score on the SAT does not matter, okay? So keep that in mind. There's about 3,000 colleges and universities in the United States. Only 14 of them require the SAT essay, and 9 of those 14 are the 9 UC schools, right? So this SAT essay is almost irrelevant unless you're finding Claremont McKenna, one of the liberal arts colleges in Southern California. That's the only school besides the UC schools that you probably have heard of that require the SAT essay, okay? So not important, you have to do it, but it's not part of the admissions decision. Okay, so just get a decent score and focus your studying on the multiple choice sections for the SAT or the ACT. Okay. Subject tests. What are subject tests? They are 1-hour multiple choice exams that test your knowledge of a particular subject in high school. And they are optional for UC schools, but if you can get a good score, you should still report it, because just like a good score on an AP or IB higher level exam will enhance your chances of getting in, a good score on these subject tests will enhance your chances of getting in. Moreover, they're optional, so it can't possibly hurt you. Colleges won't ding you, they won't downgrade your application if you didn't get a strong score in an optional test, right? If you did not get a strong score on an optional test, it's neutral, not negative on your application. Many private colleges strongly recommend, and I'm making the air quotes with my fingers, right? Strongly recommend 2 subject tests typically. Now, if they strongly recommend it and you don't do it, then you are disadvantaged, right? So if they strongly recommend it, please follow their strong recommendation. And in that case, yes, they will ding you for a low score on a subject test because they do basically require it, right? Now, how many subject tests are required differs from school to school. Most private colleges require, or strongly recommend, 2 subject tests. And Georgetown's the only school I know that requires, or strongly recommends, 3 subject tests. Some schools, like Santa Clara University, require 0 subject tests. So it depends on the school. You'll have to check with your lead counselors to help you figure out, or look online on the websites to figure out what the requirements are for the schools for subject testing. If you're applying as an engineer, you really, really, really should take the math level 2 subject test and one of the science subject tests, biology, chemistry, or physics. Okay? They really, really want to see that. Math level 2, not math level 1, which is easier. Math level 2 and a science subject test score. What if you take the test more than once? Are you punished for taking the test more than once? No. You are not punished for taking the test more than once. And they don't average your score. That's the LSAT, the law school test. They don't average SAT scores even if you take the test 3 or 4 times. So what happens if you take the test multiple times? For the UC system, for the UC application, they will use your highest total score to compare you to the other applicants. So if you took the test one time and got a 1400, you took the test again a second time and got a 1200, they'll use the 1400 from the first time. They always use the highest total score. Private colleges are even nicer. They use what's called the super score, which means if you take the test multiple times, you can mix and match your highest section scores even if they're from different test dates. So you can take your highest reading credit score from one test date and then pick the highest math score from the other test date and combine those to give your super score. Okay? Only private colleges do that. Only private colleges super score. The UC schools use the highest total score. You can't mix and match section scores for UC. Can you hide a bad test score? Yes, you can. It's called score choice. And if you tell College Board, which owns the SAT, which scores you want to report, then they will only send the scores you want to show the colleges using score choice. However, UC, Stanford, and Yale have asked that you do not use score choice, and you send all your scores. Okay, so if you hide some scores from a UC school or from Stanford or Yale, and they find out, then you technically violated their admissions policies, and it's probably not worth doing that. It's probably not worth violating their admissions policies. But in truth, it also is very, very difficult for any college to find out if you are hiding a score. Right? It's very difficult for them to see if you're hiding a score. Yeah. But nonetheless, I don't recommend violating admissions policies. Okay. So, we'll take questions at the end, so please write down or take note of any questions you might have about the academic profile. Next, we'll talk about the extracurricular profile, and this consists of clubs and organizations, community service and volunteer work, sports, music, art, special projects. By the way, you don't need to do a sport to get into college these days. You don't need to play a sport to apply to a selective college. It's a good idea to be healthy and exercise, absolutely, but you don't need to play a sport to apply to a selective college. So if the only reason you're doing cross country is because your parents are forcing you to play a sport, you don't have to do that anymore. If you hate it, then do something you actually like. Okay? So there's another myth in college admissions that for extracurricular activities, you need to be well-rounded, right? Which means pretty good at a lot of things in order to gain admission to a highly selective college. But well, the reality nowadays is instead of recruiting well-rounded individuals, colleges try to build a well-rounded freshman class. And how do they do that? They do that by admitting students with different skills, different talents, different interests, different backgrounds. Right? So instead of recruiting or admitting a bunch of students who are all pretty good at a lot of things, they want to have many different students who are super good at one or two things. Okay? So while it's good to be well-rounded in the sense that you need to do more than just study to gain admission to highly selective colleges in the US, it's also okay if you specialize in something. So instead of trying to do 20 different activities, just pick the 2 or 3 activities that you really enjoy and find meaningful and pursue those. And pursue those with passion and integrity and intensity. Okay? So this goes back to you do you, right? You don't have to be good at a bunch of different things. Whatever you really enjoy, go run with that. Okay? That's perfectly fine. In other words, be pointy, not well-rounded, right? Don't be pretty good at a bunch of different things. Be super focused and really good at a couple of things, right? That doesn't mean, look, you can blow off pursuing extracurricular co-curricular activities and just kind of like be lazy and do nothing. No, what that means is find what you like to do, find what you like meaningful, do what you find meaningful, and pursue that with intensity and integrity. Okay? It will be more useful on a college application to be specializing in something, right, versus doing a whole bunch of different things. All right, so I get this question a lot. What kind of activities stand out on a college application. And this kind of goes back to the advice from the beginning about you do you. So I guess another way of putting it is this. Students, do not live your life trying to impress some random anonymous college application reader in the future. You know what I mean? Do not live your life always thinking about how can I boost up my resume for my college application. That's a terrible way to live your life. Instead, go find the things that you find meaningful, that you find important, that you find interesting and enjoyable, and pursue those. But do those things very well, right? And that way, as a benefit to doing what you enjoy, it will also help you on the college application. But don't live your life always trying to boost your resume for the college application. Now, what activities should you pursue? There are some pretty common activities on college applications. Volunteering at a hospital, right? So, volunteering in a hospital makes perfect sense if you want to be a doctor, right? By the way, how many people here are going to be doctors? Or how many are planning to be pre-med in college? Okay, all of you with Asian moms should be raising your hands. I have an Asian mom too, and I was supposed to be a doctor, and she is still disappointed to this day that I'm not a doctor. But I volunteered at the hospital. Why? Because that's what you do, right? If you're going to be a pre-med student in high school, volunteer at a hospital, of course. But a lot of people are doing that. Like maybe half the applications I read, people volunteer at a hospital. So remember how many people are applying to colleges these days, right? So volunteering at a hospital by itself doesn't help you stand out because so many other people are doing it. It's a fairly common activity. So is playing in your high school orchestra. So is writing for your school newspaper, running cross country, or tutoring high school students. I'm not saying that these are bad things. I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things at all. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is keep in mind that a lot of people also do these same activities. So what does that mean? You need to differentiate your experiences doing these common activities from everyone else's experiences. How do you do that? Well, when you list your activity on a college application, you don't just list the activity, there's also a space for describing the activity. And that's how you differentiate yourself. In that description, the way you talk about what you did in high school needs to be so specific to your experience that it could not have been anyone else's experience. Okay? So don't say, if you're president of the speech and debate club, don't say presided over speech and debate meetings, because that's an obvious, that's given, right? You're supposed to do that. Of course, everyone knows that that's what presidents do. So instead, in the description, talk about successes, honors, awards, leadership experiences that you have that help distinguish your speech and debate experience from everyone else's speech and debate experience. You know, quadrupled membership in my first year as president, right? Something like that, right? So parents, those of you who, maybe are familiar with resume writing, that's measurable successes, measurable accomplishments. That's what you put in the descriptions, okay? That's what they'll be looking for on the descriptions of your activities as well. So less common are things like starting a nonprofit organization, touring with your band, writing in your column in the local community paper, running a charity half marathon, tutoring community college students. So this one student application, he was a sophomore, and he finished calculus, AP Calculus BC as a sophomore, then went to his local junior college and took multivariable calculus and linear algebra, aced those classes, and then started tutoring the community college students, even though he's only a junior in high school, right? So that's unusual, right? So here's the thing. Yes, it's true that some activities stand out. In other words, it's easier to remember these applicants because what they did was so unusual that it really helped them stand out from the rest of the applications. So it's still possible to stand out when you pursue a common activity. You just have to remember that you need to talk about it in a very specific way, showing that you had uncommon achievements pursuing a common activity. Okay? You get the difference? Okay? So, another thing is, there's one quality that highly selective colleges are looking for in their students. Can you guys guess what that is? Just shout it out. What do you think? Yeah, I think I heard it. It is leadership, right? The highly selective colleges, both in Canada and the United States and everywhere in the world, pride themselves, these highly selective colleges pride themselves on generating the next generation of leaders in society, right? So, any leadership activity you have, you must include it and highlight it in your application, either on the activities list or in the personal statements, the college application essays on those applications, right? Now, leadership can take many forms. You do not have to be the president of your club in order to be a leader in your club. And what I mean is, you can do something presidential even if you don't have the title of president. Right? Leadership means you're in charge of other people, you're in charge of a budget, or you're in charge of a project. Also, in the family context, if you have family duties and responsibilities, so for example, your parents work late at night, they don't come home until after dinner, so you need to go pick up your little sister from school, and you go home and cook dinner for your sister every night. That is leadership in the context of your family. Okay, so leadership can take many forms, and if you've done any sort of leadership experience, then you need to mention it on the college application. Absolutely required. Okay. So remember, if you participate in a common activity, try to make that participation result in uncommon achievements. And that way, it doesn't matter if 20,000 other people volunteer at the hospital too, you received an award for being like the most trusted, the most impressive volunteer at that hospital, right? If you participate in a common activity, make sure that it results in uncommon achievements. And that's the way you can still stand out. Okay, so let's go to the third bucket of information, personal and family information. And this consists of socioeconomic status. FGC means first generation in your family to go to college. So if your parents went to college, you are not first generation college. If your parents did not go to college, in the United States or Canada, then if your parents did not go to college, then you are first generation to go to college. And why is this important? If you are first generation college, it's considered a slight hardship. And you get a little, a little boost in the college application process, a little extra love on the college application process. Now, students, if your parents went to college, do not go home mad that they went to college, right? Therefore denying your chance of being first generation. It's good that your parents went to college. You should be thankful. But if you are first generation, then I just wanted to make sure that you point that out on the application itself, okay? Because it is considered a slight challenge, a light challenge. Employment, family responsibilities, disabilities, personal hardships, personal qualities. These last four, family responsibilities, disabilities, hardships, and qualities, these are generally discussed in the personal statements, right? The college application essays. And we can talk about that later too if you like, but there are places in the application for all of these talking points if you need to discuss them. So speaking of personal statements, I would caution you against writing about your family's immigration story. Why? Because it will sound like everyone else's immigration story. I mean, of the, thousands of applications that I've read, I have yet to read the immigration story that says, my parents left the old country to give me worse opportunities and a worse education then they could get back into the homeland, right? Everyone immigrates to the United States to get better education, better opportunities. And remember, your goal is to stand out in a good way from the rest of the crowd, right? So if you tell a story that's like everyone else's story, then that's not very helpful on your application. So avoid writing about cliche or overused topics. Never write about it. If you're a very good writer, then sure, you could probably write about something that is overused in an interesting and meaningful and helpful way. But it's going to be harder to do, right? If you're talking about a story that a lot of other people also tell. Same with the sports story, the musical recital story, and the tribute to a parent or grandparent. About the tribute to a grandparent or parent, oftentimes I read these essays, these personal statements about this my dad is awesome, he does this, he does that, he does this, and I really look up to him. And I'm like, well, that's great. I wish I could admit the dad. The dad sounds terrific, but the kid, I have no idea what the student's like. So avoid the tribute to another person, because that other person is not the person applying to college. The music recital story. There are 2 music recital stories. Okay, I practiced really hard. The day of the recital came. I played really well, and I learned a life lesson. Or I practiced really hard. The day the recital came, I played really terribly, and I learned a life lesson. So, unless you are an exceptional writer and can make something really interesting out of a common overtold story, let's say, avoid talking about these overused topics. Find something else to talk about. Okay? Now, I talked about personal hardships as one of the elements of your personal and family profile. Some people think that you need to write about how your life is so terrible, right? So that colleges will feel sorry for you and therefore let you in, right? So the truth is, you do not need to live a tragic life in order to get into a highly selective college. So like when I work, when you work with your elite counselors, and you tell them, okay, I need to come up with some kind of tragedy that happened to me. No, that's not true. It's okay. You don't have to live a tragedy to get into a positive college. However, if you did actually face significant challenges in 9th through 12th grades, then yes, you probably should write about it. So, significant challenges in 9th through 12th grade. Significant, my girlfriend broke up with me in 10th grade, and that's why I got a C in chemistry. Not significant, okay? Also, but dad's business went bankrupt in 10th grade, and that impacted our family finances. Yes, absolutely significant. Now, here's the thing. Parents don't like it when their kids share the family's troubles with others, right? But the college application is not the place to hide the fact that dad's business went bankrupt in 10th grade, because that's an important piece of information that allows me, the application reader, to contextualize your personal and academic accomplishments, right? If dad's business went bankrupt in 10th grade and you still managed to get straight A's in 10th grade, despite all that turmoil going on in your household outside of the classroom, that's even more impressive than just looking at the grades by themselves. So the hardships help contextualize your personal and academic accomplishments. So don't hide significant challenges you faced in 9th through 12th grades. Right? Also, please, 9th through 12th grades. So one application I read, the student tried to argue that the reason he didn't do well in junior year in high school was because of the Iranian Revolution. And the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979. Right? So it's a very difficult connection to draw between 1979 and this kid's junior year. So now, if it started before ninth grade, but continues to have repercussions in your high school years, that's fine, right? So you contracted, you're diagnosed with ALS in 5th grade, right? And you still have it now. Of course, that's going to be relevant, right? What I would caution you against writing about are things like this one student wanted to write about how he was bullied in 5th grade. Talk about that in his college application essays. And I was like, that was 7 years ago, right? And I feel bad for you. I'll help you find a therapist and we'll work through this together, but let's not write about it on your, that was 5th grade, right? Surely something meaningful happens in 9th through 12th grade that you can write about, okay? So, significant challenge in that focus, yes, you should write about it. Colleges should know about it. Don't hide it. Parents, you have to allow your students to be able to share this information because it is important on the college application. Also, speaking to parents, you guys are terrible people for reading personal statements. You are the exactly wrong audience for your child's college application essays. You know why? You know them very well, and these college application essays are meant to be read by total strangers. So you have way too much knowledge about your kid, and probably some preconceived notions of what your students should write about and should not write about, which probably won't help them. Also, students, as I'm talking to students now, you know very well that the way you express yourself when your parents are watching is probably going to be very different from the way you do it when they're not watching. Right? And so that kind of inhibits the personal side of the personal statement, right? Because the real you isn't really coming through. So I would say, parents, you have to allow your students to work on it, and if they don't want to show it to you, then you should respect that wish. If they do want to show it to you, then great. If they don't, please respect that wish. It's their personal statements, okay? All right, so how do we talk about hardships and challenges? How do we talk about obstacles we faced and overcome? Should we say, I am a victim? Like, my life really sucks. Please let me into your school because my life is so bad. No, of course, that's not how you approach it. You don't talk about I am a victim. You say instead, I am a victor, right? Not, my life is terrible, please let me into your school. It's instead, look at all that I've done despite these challenges and hardships, right? Another way I like to say it is, don't write about the hardship or challenge. Instead, write through it, right? You mentioned the challenge in passing. It's not the focus of your personal statement. The focus of your personal statement should be your goals, aspirations, plans, passions, talents, and interests. That's what you talk about, and then you say, oh, by the way, so I really want to be a journalist. I write for my school newspaper. I've been published 20 times. I even submitted a short article to the local newspaper and got published there. And by the way, I'm also dyslexic, right? So having to organize all my notes was even more challenging. And I know it's crazy that a dyslexic person wants to be a writer, but that's my goal. Right? So the essay doesn't start off, I am dyslexic, right? It doesn't start off with that. It doesn't focus on that. It focuses on the talents, passions, and interests, and the students' life goals, and says, oh, by the way, I'm also dyslexic, but hey, I've overcome it. I've got, I can still do these amazing things despite the challenge. Right? You see the difference? Right? So the essay doesn't start with, my dad's business went bankrupt in 10th grade. No, it doesn't start off with that. It talks about something else and says, and by the way, all this was achieved even though dad's business went bankrupt in 10th grade. And our family was impacted in this way, this way, this way. Good? So don't talk about the challenge, talk through the challenge. So after I look at the entire application, cover to cover, student info, family info, school info, transcripts, test scores, activities lists, personal statements, I generally ask myself this very important question. Did this student maximize his or her educational and life opportunities? Did this student maximize his or her educational and life opportunities? Now, if you can position yourself on the application in such a way that the reader says, yeah, this student really did maximize her educational opportunities, then you know you have a strong college application. Okay? Did this student maximize his or her educational life opportunities? Try to make it so that the readers of your application will say yes. Okay, how do I make my college list? Well, there's many ways. Talk to friends who attended the college. Do a campus tour if you can. If you can't physically visit the school on the websites, many colleges now have virtual tours on the websites. They have virtual 3D tours of the campuses on the websites themselves. Talk to the college representatives that come to your school. The Fisk Guide to College is a very useful guide because it actually talks about the campus culture and the student life at the schools. It was started by the education writer for the New York Times, and his notes about each school that was on his beat became the Fisk Guide. Very good way of getting insight into what life is like as a student at that campus. So do research using that. U.S. News Rankings. The U.S. News and World Report, as you might know, comes out with a list of the 100 best colleges in the United States. Now, there's a smart way to use this ranking and a dumb way to use the ranking. The dumb way to use this ranking is, well, you know what? UCLA is ranked higher than NYU, so I'm not going to apply to NYU because I only want to go to the higher ranked school. That's the dumb way of using the ranking list. The smart way to use it is for research, for broadening the list of your colleges. So let's say your elite counselor tells you, you know what, you're pretty competitive for UCLA, right? You have a strong profile, you have a good chance of getting into UCLA. Then what you do is you go to the U.S. News rankings list, and then you look at the schools that are around UCLA in the rankings list. And then you do research on those schools, because if you're competitive for UCLA, you'll be similarly competitive to those peer institutions. You'll also be competitive for those schools around it on the rankings list. That's how you use the rankings, okay, as ways of broadening your college list. And then, of course, the most useful resource will be Elite Club Canada. It's been around for 16 years, and your counselors are very knowledgeable. Definitely talk to them. They have the perspective of having gone through many, many application cycles. You're going through yours. You will go through yours. They've gone through many. So use them as a resource. They have the experience. Also, when you're making your college list, I don't necessarily recommend picking a college only on the basis of your current intellectual interests. Why is that? Well, I used to teach at UCLA. I was a PhD student there studying Asian American history, and they have graduate students teach classes. And I taught one year, or a couple of years, I taught a freshman-only class, which was a year-long class. So the same students from the beginning of freshman year to the end. And at the beginning of the year, I would ask the students, okay, how many of you guys are pre-med, right? And maybe half the students raise their hands. And then at the end of the year, I would poll the same students, how many of you guys are pre-med? And then maybe 25% raise their hands. So even in the freshman year, a lot of my students changed their intended majors. They changed their academic goals, even within the first year of college. So what does this mean for you? It means that I would not pick a college only because of its academic strengths. I would not pick a college only on the basis of, well, I really want to do business, and so I'm going to only apply to schools that are strong in business. Because it's likely that your major will change. And parents, you guys can attest to this, right? You probably changed your major. You probably did not graduate from college with a major you intended to when you went in, right? So I would caution you against saying, okay, I'm only going to apply to schools that are strong in business because I'm sure that's what I'm going to do. Because, you know, what happens if you get to a school like Babson, which is a business college, only does business. You get to Babson, you start doing your classes, and you're like, I don't really like business, right? And you're kind of stuck in a school that only does business, right? So most of the universities,